Cool. Hi everybody, how you going? Okay, that's better. All right. Firstly, I'd just like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, largely because water is such an important part of their culture. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about water. This is going to be a bit of a tough thing for me because Peter's just told you all that water's the problem. He's just basically said, don't do water sensitive urban design because look at the crap outcomes you get. So I've got to stand up here now and say, well, that's actually not the case, which is going to be quite interesting. I'm also aware that the context for today is about green infrastructure in the new environment of probably medium density and infill. So that's also a little bit of a focus. But I'm also going a little bit more holistic and not just talking about stormwater, but there is a little bit more to this, hopefully. I'm sure you're all familiar with the rhetoric that we all know. Perth has been under declining rainfall conditions for a very long time. We have had, and the Water Corporation message that you hear all the time, declining rainfall and runoff to dams, rivers, creeks and wetlands, which means that those water sources that we used to depend on, the dams down there are, I'm going to say, 15% now. It's actually a lot less in most years, but that's the Water Corporation message at the moment. We also have increasing water demands. So although we have those water sources at the moment, the more people, the more that our city grows, the more water we need. So we've been very, very lucky here in Perth. The Water Corporation has done some incredible planning and got us ready for this lack of rainfall and runoff, and we have desal. But the other part that we have is groundwater replenishment, which is great. So if we can do that and continue to treat our wastewater, inject it into the ground or even just inject it into a dam, then we have a replenishment, we have a continual source of water for us as the city grows. Because the impacts of climate change are not stopping, we're going to see increasing declines of our rainfall volumes. But what we are also likely to see, it's still not too sure, is maybe the intensity of our rainfall might increase for short periods. So we're actually going to get less rainfall over the course of the year, but you actually get more intense storms and over fewer periods. So what that does is that changes the way our environments respond to water and how our infrastructure can manage that water. Because the way it falls means that it runs off faster and you get larger volumes. So what do you do with those? But the other critical thing to note is that the temperature is also going to increase. We know our plants will respond to that by requiring more water for evapotranspiration. So we've seen that by about 2050, our plants are going to need at least 7.5% more water than they need now to be healthy. So we've got less rainfall, less volumes of water, it's going to increase in temperature, our plants are going to need more water. Where are we going to get this water from? We need to think smarter. So we've seen for our cities that what this means is, and I know that you can't read any of that stuff, but there's a whole lot of amazing research that's been done. This is one by EY that demonstrates that already in the world, 37 of our aquifers, we've got the biggest aquifers across the world, 21 of those are already at sustainable limits. So we're already using our groundwater resources. If we have less rainfall, that's less recharge to our groundwater. So if we're using that faster than it can get back in, that's a bad thing. And we're doing that already on the Swan Coastal Plain, which is not so good. But it's not just those impacts of climate change on water resources, but the health of our communities. So the temperature increases and we're going to see some significant cost to the health of our communities. Because what we end up with this, which is hot, dry and grey. So what do we need to do about it? All right, the answer, yay. Oh, that didn't work. There we go. Add green infrastructure everywhere. So what is green infrastructure? I don't quite know how I managed to do all of these things. It normally just comes straight up. But anyway, that's all right. It does sound a little bit complex, but really it's not. It's just vegetation, but it's also soil. So vegetation and associated soil on buildings and streets, private spaces and public places. So where are we going to put these bits of green in our urban fabric? The thing about green infrastructure though, that I'd really like to see, and the theme of this conference, is integration. So we really do need to link the way we build that green into our cities with water management. Not just recognising that it's the water that the plants need, but how we're actually managing our water cycle as a whole. So yes, plants need water for irrigation. Everybody knows that. And we've been using groundwater to water our parks for a long time, but that is actually going to run out. So where are we going to get this water from? So the idea is that, and I really do fundamentally believe it, drainage can coexist in our streets and in our landscape, our public open space. I apologise, POS is public open space. We don't need to sterilise it for that single purpose, which is what a sump is. So you can bring more water into our environment. You just have to understand the type of water events that you are designing for and managing, and where that goes and how often that bit of the park is going to be wet, or that bit of the street is going to be wet. You hear, not quite sure when I'm talking about this, but I have to. Okay, outcomes are optimised where green infrastructure is watered by non-drinking water. So we know that we need drinking water, and the cost of desalination is quite high. The cost of our scheme, the energy cost of our scheme water here in Western Australia is very high because A, we use desal, and B, we've got to pump it around place. That's not to say that that's a bad thing, particularly if with our wastewater system we treat that and it goes back in and we all have water, which is fantastic. But the thing that we're not doing very well here in Perth is using those alternative sources or using water more than once. Yes, we've got Beanie up and there's a little bit of wastewater treatment going on there, but we really just use water once and then it goes out to the ocean. So if we can think about grey water from our showers, who's got a grey water system in their house? Seriously, none of you. Who's got a rainwater tank? All right, that's a little bit better. Whose rainwater tank is plumbed into their toilet? Okay, you guys are legends. Okay, the other option that we have, obviously, that I've mentioned is treated wastewater from whatever systems you've got, from our big wastewater treatment plants or from our smaller ones. You can also take wastewater out of the sewer network before it gets to the wastewater treatment plant and treat it locally. So there are localised solutions. We just don't do them very well here. And of course, groundwater use within sustainable limits. So the idea, which I really do still believe, is that we can deliver multiple benefits from looking at the way we manage water. So those elements there of water-sensitive urban design. So the thing that Peter was talking about the most was really about flood. So that's only one very, very small part of water-sensitive urban design. So that's managing stormwater, but the big event. And in the old way of talking, that was a 1 in 100 event, only come once every 100 years. But that's not right. It's just the probability of that occurs 1 in 100. Every day, we have a 1 in 100 risk that that flood might occur. So it doesn't happen every 100 years, because Queensland had 2 100-year floods in a row. But that's only one very small part of what water-sensitive urban design is. The other bit is about treating our small flows. So in Perth, on the Swan Coastal Plain, our average event is about 15 millimetres. So once you get 15 millimetres of rain, that's an average event, and that means that our environments that are used to getting water throughout our winter season are going to be happy if they get these little bits of 15 mils. Those average rainfall events up to 15 mils are 95% of the volume of water that falls. So it's 95%. So they're our small or frequent events. What you then need to do for between the 95 and the 97% of the rainfall, that's a conveyance thing, and that are our larger events. Used to be called our 5-year events. 1 in every 5 years you might get a bigger event, or they're now 20% AEP. So the chance of these bigger events occurring is 1 in 5. And then our big rainfall events, that is only 1% of the volume of water that falls. So why are we designing something for a 1% of the rainfall? What we really need to do is design for the small events, our first 15 mils of water. And that's that little bit about harvest, infiltrate, stormwater. Yes, where we've got sand, all good. So we can do that. We've got to be water efficient, we want to improve water quality, and yes, we've got to control these peak discharges. But by doing that, we can do these other things, which is linking to the health and well-being values, the outcomes that you get from green infrastructure. Everybody loves green infrastructure, all except people that don't like trees. But hopefully we're getting our community a little bit more educated these days. We know, I've got more slides. I've got too many slides. How am I? I've got Biodiversity, urban cooling, they're the outcomes. I'll talk about them more. So what does this mean for water sensitive built form? What does it look like in a medium density, increasing sort of thing? What we're trying to do is recognise in our built form where water goes. So this blue design is recognising that water in our built form, we can use surfaces to capture that water, and we can use surfaces where the water goes in the ground. So getting the water back in the ground is actually really important because that recharges our groundwater. It also cools the environment. So recognising our building and how water will respond to that. There are surfaces to capture, there are surfaces to go in. But the other bit about water sensitive urban form, built form, is recognising where we can put green and recognising the importance of outdoor spaces, outdoor private space. So I think Peter showed you the way we're building now doesn't have very much outdoor private space, and so we're going to be relying on our public spaces, our streets and our parks, because there isn't much left. So let's build more private open space into our buildings. Yes, that means we probably need to go up because everybody needs 4 bedrooms and now we all need a study instead of a TV room, but we can do that by going up and have some more areas where people can get out into that environment. And that's a really important element, is these outdoor areas for garden and for people to come back to nature. So what is water sensitive infill development? It is providing increased access to public and private open space so that we can have that space for trees and for canopy. The increased permeability is really important. So those areas, deep soil areas, are really critical, not just for a tree, but getting water back into the ground, because that has a significant impact on the heat. So that is where, if we have hard surfaces, things just get hotter and hotter and hotter. But if we've got soil, we've got moisture, we've got a tree, it reduces the urban heat so significantly. And of course the other bit about water is we love alternative sources of water, underground rainwater tanks if we can, plumbed into toilets, a couple of year legends, but fit for purpose water if we can for open space. What does it look like in our buildings? We can do this at a lot scale. We can do it in streets and parks, and I'll show you those, but we can also do this at a lot scale, even in areas that aren't sand. So rain gardens or biofilters or tree pits, they're all the same thing. It's basically an area where we want to put some vegetation. We can do that in the ground level, and provide storage for the downpipe in that, or we can raise it. And that is actually a volume that manages our rainwater. It means that that's not flowing off into the street and increasing the size of our drainage system. Because as soon as you connect a lot to your driveway, to the street, that increases the need for bigger drains because you're not managing it on your street. And so that 15 mils that you should be hanging on to, because that's what our environment needs, ends up further away, and our infrastructure gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the more that we can manage our little frequent events, the 15 mils on site, by things like this, the smaller our drainage systems are. Grey water systems, green walls, facades, they can happen. We've just had some research done by UWA that demonstrates that green walls and facades are workable in Western Australia, in Perth. Green roofs and podiums are also a very, very good option. You don't have to do the whole green roof, and it doesn't have to be on the roof. It can just be any structure that's built. You can stick some vegetation on the top. We'll go through these again. So living walls where we are growing vegetation in planter boxes up and down. Have we got any architects here? Awesome. I reckon every architecture design building at the moment has green on it, don't they? Every picture you see in the paper, the new apartments, woohoo, they've all got green on them because it's the thing to do. Where are we getting the water from? If you plumb those planter boxes into your shower, we have a sustainable source of water to water the green infrastructure as it goes up and down the buildings. We also have enough information that shows that those planter boxes will take out any contaminants and will treat the water to a necessary standard. The health department does not require approval. Your local government does, but the health department, because that's your own planter box, it's your own system, you're not giving that water to anybody else. So it's an easy thing to do, just like the toilets. So household biofilters, I've already shown you that. We've got guidance. We've got research that shows the performance of these systems and how safe they are. And this is doable. This stuff is out there now. If you want to go to the bigger extent, then there's this development over in New South Wales, Aquarivo, which goes that extra step and actually collects locally everybody's wastewater, treats it and gives it back into the house for toilet flushing and for water. So these systems do exist in Australia. They can happen. They've got their local wastewater treatment plant, which is in a box right next door to another house. There's no odour, there's no issues with it. So we can do these sorts of things. We just have to have the will. Water sensitive streets. So this is what I was talking about before. The small rainfall, so the 95% of the volume, which is only 15 mils of rain, you don't need big area for that. It's just little. It goes into our streets and we want to put it in areas of vegetation. So we want to put it in rain gardens and in tree pits and in swales. It doesn't require a large area. It is more challenging on clays, but it's easy on sand. It just goes into the ground. So those minor events that I was talking about, the 1 in 20, the 20-year event, basically, that's the bit that's going to move down the road somewhere. So we do need to have somewhere for that to go. Traditionally, that would go in a pipe and it would just keep going down. But what we can do is we can convey them through roadside swales. Yes, we recognise that they don't work in the frontage, they're good in the medians, they're good on large roads. We don't want them on every road, but in a lot of instances these things work and they're beautiful. And they are watering those trees. Because we need to make sure that our trees get water because it's going to reduce. We know that. The major event doesn't go in these systems. If you're designing these systems for the flood, you're doing it wrong. So what happens is they'll fill up in the little one, but if we get more and more water, then that goes out and it cascades down the road and it can do so safely. So it's just looking at how far into the road. We used to have gutters. You know, build gutters these days on our roads and we'd solve everything. But anyway, and if you get out of your car and it's rained and you step in a puddle, that has to be okay too. People don't like that anymore, which is bizarre. Anyway, so this is what we see. Why would you put a curb around the poor little tree? It needs water. So let's think about the way we're designing our roads, designing our car parks, because all you do is mean that you need bigger areas for the water to go if you're stopping it from going where it should go. So get the water into the ground, because the more that you can manage locally, the smaller the drainage system needs to be. So the more we can get water into our trees, into the ground, the easier it will be. So again, let stormwater into medians, verges, flush and broken curbing. It doesn't have to be flush. I know people get a little bit nervous about a flush curb. Oh my God, the car might drive over it. I was in Port Hedland yesterday. Massive, great big trucks, cars everywhere. They have flush curbing and none of these contractors have driven through the swale. So people, you know, we can do this stuff. We're not completely silly. But if you want to put bollards, we can put bollards, as you can see there. But the broken curb is probably not a bad option. So that's this one. Oh no, it's coming up. Sorry. Permeable surfaces, which is what this is. We're going to hear from somebody talk about permeable surfaces soon. It's so exciting. But not only does this help treat stormwater, it gives you green, and the cooling impact of this, as compared to the bitumen, is amazing. Lets you plant a tree, gives you shade, double whammy in terms of the cooling effect that we have. So we do have to wonder where the footpath is how the water is going to get in there, but there are some really, really good designs. We've got to stop building footpaths back a curb, because that means that we're increasing the area of hard stand, roads flowing, stormwater infrastructure gets bigger. If we can have footpaths off the curb, then we're disconnecting the stormwater, we're keeping our water on our lots, and we're making our drainage systems smaller. I know there's so many arguments that will come up there, but anyway. So, streets, yes, turn them into green linkages. So this is the broken curb that I was talking about before. These are biofilters. These are in a main street. We can do this easily. Nobody's driving into this. You even put a seat next to it. People want to sit there. This is easy stuff. We're going to make green linkages. There's arguments for different species of trees. I won't go into that now. But flush curbs. Get the water into the streetscape. It feeds it. And it recharges our groundwater. Okay, the success factors. The best thing to do is the most simple inlet and outlet structure. Don't do any of these complex things where we're trying to put it in the ground and pipe it here. So if you can have the water coming off the road, it goes in, it fills up as much as it can, and then if there's way too much rain, it just flows out and goes down into the network. So you will have pipes and pits in these systems if they're probably small, but hey, it just flows down the road. So easy inlet, outlet, off we go. passive watering increases the growth, and I'm sure Vic will show you some slides about that soon. Okay, I'll keep going. Passively watered streetscapes. Oh, see, that's another one. Very simple, inlet-outlet structures. Yes, every little bit of rain will feed a tree if you let it. Let the water in, stop with these curbs. So the next area, we've gone from the building to the street. Let's talk about public realm. Traditional public realm design. Plaza, fully paved, pipe drainage, because people can't get their feet wet, so the drain just goes, takes it away. Public open spaces with large areas of grass. This is the old way of doing it, and you would have had your sump in the corner. Like that. Single function sump, massive piece of grass. Ooh, can we combine them? Yes. Lots with low, narrow verges, no amenity, no shade. This is what we're doing, it's awful. So let's think about the way we can do it. More permeable surface, let the stormwater into the ground if you can. Yes, there have to be areas of paving, but let's direct those areas of paving to a garden bed. And then the water just goes straight in there. Lots of water, grade is definitely going to be an issue, safety is an issue in certain areas, but let's think about where we can get the water to. Rainwater capture for reuse in toilets, it does add up. Yes, it's not going to be as cheap as the Water Corporation water out of the tap, we know that. But if everybody has a rainwater tank plumbed into their toilets, maybe that's going to mean that the third desalination plant isn't required for another 15 years. Waterways landscaping, urban habitat, cooling, we want to do this sort of stuff. This is also showing you what you can do where we have grade. Look, comes in here and it just cascades down, and all you're doing, you're using structures to slow down the water. We can do this where it's steep. Do you know what? It's harder to manage water where it's flat. So creating all of these flat landscapes means the water sits, it doesn't run off. So let's hang on to some of our landform. And it's not drainage's fault that we're losing landform, it's flat blocks, benching, housing. Are there any builders here? Building companies, I don't like them. Okay. So the next bit, water sensitive parks. Yes, do it all in one space. So what we have is the small event goes into the vegetated area. We don't want small events in grass because it gets a little bit boggy. So this design for the small event, the first 15 mils, if it has to end up in the park, it goes in a piece of vegetation. It's easy. You just hide it. I've lost my little light. There it is. It's a little tiny bit of vegetation. And then the large events, 1 in 100-year event, goes onto the park. Multifunctional spaces. We can create them. And this is safety. We can do this. You don't have to have these flat bits everywhere, because if you're managing for your small event in these small vegetated sections, the flood can go in an area that people use. It doesn't have to be in a sump. It can go very happily out into the rest of the park, because it doesn't happen very often, and probably those trees would be really thirsty and quite like it. Because this is what we're aiming for. This is only a 20-year event. So that filled up that park, you could see it before, and then 24 hours later it is gone. Yes, there are some structural cells underneath, and yes, we are in sand. But you can still do this in clays, and you just design for outlets. We can deliver these spaces. And yes, it can go wrong. So for those of you who, this is a little bit old now, and it's in the city of Swan, and the vegetation has gone absolutely nuts. But the issue with this is a living stream that runs through here. But wait, there is a massive biofilter over here. Oh, and there's another one over here. It's not necessary. You don't need to separate out these volumes, the areas for treatment. They're just too big. So I guess if you're designing, or how many engineers have we got? I love you all. Look, it's very interesting, isn't it, the way we think about why are we getting the type of development we're getting? Because we all agree it's not fabulous. But somebody will find a reason to point the finger at somebody else. It's drainage's fault that we're having flat landscape. I actually don't think it is. I think it's the builder's fault. Because I know that there are very few house builders who will build with more than a 2% grade. You can't buy a house out of the Sunday Times and put it anywhere, can we? If we have areas that are not square or rectangular and not benched. So if we change the way we build our houses, we might be able to come back to those times where back in Duncraig we can build with some landform. But until we change that, then the engineering process isn't going to change. And the engineering process that says we're going to end up with this needs to be challenged because it's not the intent. I think that was what Peter recognised, is that the good policy, there are policies out there that get blamed for this stuff, but that wasn't their intention. Their intention was to deliver the outcome, the healthy environment, water quality treatment in the right places where it's necessary, not just we need a biofilter because I'm going to get my approval because it's easier. Let's think about it. There is no important receiving environment anywhere near this space. There's no conservation category wetland. There's no piece of bush forever. The receiving environment for this water is it's going to the ground, and yes, people are using it, but over-designing to achieve the criteria is the wrong thing to do. So let's think about where I'm living or where I am and what the receiving environment is for the water. If it's of low risk, let's not go crazy with the biofilters, because it's not necessary, because who's the benefiting from all of this treatment, which is really impacting on our functionality of our public open space. The problem that we get these oversized things is also the conservatism that an engineer will use to make sure that things are going to be safe. Infiltration rates, one of those, that's the biggest. We all know that City of Swan over-designed their sumps for years and years because you're only allowed a 2 metre per day infiltration rate when you were measuring 20. So the water goes in the ground much faster in a lot of areas than the design rate. So that means that the things that we design have to be 10 times bigger. So let's question some of those engineering practices. I can rant for a long time, but I will try not to, sorry. There's so many implementation issues. Cost, housing affordability, not livability. People are thinking of, oh my God, I'm buying this block, I've got to get it the cheapest possible. Not, that block has got no access to shade, to amenity. The people in that house are going to get sick, and the cost of their air conditioning system is going to be crazy. So, I would urge our state government to start thinking a little bit differently. The other argument we hear all the time is maintenance. Local government don't want the space. I can't maintain that. They don't want trees in the streets. They don't want individual street tree pits because they have to maintain them. You talk to your local government. There's so many of you in the room. Do you guys want trees? Yeah! See? It's easy. Space. This whole thing about lot yield. The more we are developing in these areas where it's tough, the more land we need to manage these tough issues. If we've got shallow groundwater, if we've got clays, we need more land to manage this. But we do know that it is driven by lot yield, and so they keep squeezing these blocks in, which of course impacts on the amount of water that flows off. The time, I think, is also an issue. It does take a long time for plan for these things, but it's actually talking to it. Oh, we'll keep going. Okay. Access, ownership of the wastewater, perceived community support. Yep. Sometimes the community really don't like trees. And how's the insurance ad that says, I'll give you a lower premium if you don't have a big tree in your yard? Ridiculous. Anyway, how do we solve these issues? Right, there are multiple benefits. Here's some numbers, those killer facts, roll them out. As soon as you stick a number on something, people go, yeah, right, okay. 1 hectare of trees can provide 19 people's oxygen consumption for a year. Trees are going to result in $142 million worth of health benefits. So let's start thinking of all of those benefits that we get, not just for water, not just for biodiversity, but for people's health and the community. Yes, we are doing it to reduce stormwater pollutants, surface temperatures, I'll go into that, but the lower odds of heart disease, hypertension and diabetes. And we just did some research that demonstrated statistically that the closer you are to a park, the healthier you are. Okay. Heat. Everyone talks about urban heat. Does everybody know about the urban heat island effect? Do I? Yes. Okay, so I don't need to go through it. But I guess the thing to recognise is this is in heatwave conditions in Melbourne. And the thing is, so the red is how hot it was, and you can see it just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And this is the number of deaths that we have. So the longer sustained heat wave does result in more deaths. There's no doubt about it. But this is the important thing for me. This is the threshold temperature that a city has. And if we go even 1 or 2 degrees over this threshold temperature, morbidity and mortality increases exponentially. So we're not trying to cool a city by bucket loads. We're not trying to achieve a 10-degree reduction. We only need a 1 or 2 degree reduction to bring that city down below its threshold temperature. so that the health of the community doesn't go nuts. So we have research that demonstrates that green infrastructure can do it. Yay! So this is trees. Oh my God. 27 of 42. Right, okay. CRC's research. 2 minutes. Look at that, part cooling. Increased tree veg cover. We can bring it down by that 1 degree necessary for that threshold. But the biggie thing is this UTCI, which is the way people feel. It's thermal comfort. 10-degree difference. It's fabulous. And we can do it at that street level as well, so the streetscape. So this green infrastructure does reduce the heat within a city, like what you measure, but what makes people feel better. So that thermal comfort is the critical thing. You get a 12-degree reduction if you're standing under a tree. People are happier. They're much happier. Okay. Also can document through modelling the impact and the benefits of urban heat. So this is our traditional form. Terrible, green only in where the street trees are. But water sensitive development where we've got more of those spaces for green. Doesn't have to be a tree, it just needs to be soil, because that's where you get the heat reductions, is in this soil. I'll explain that later. If anybody wants this presentation, I can give it to you. Mental health, yes, all of this, we've all seen it, all the headlines. Trees may make us more generous and trusting. I liked that one. Okay. The value of passively irrigated landscapes. So this is the new term. So it's a tree pit, but all we're trying to do is get stormwater into it. Now, over the eastern states, it's called passive irrigation. We always have to come up with a new term. But there's reasons for it. We can demonstrate the value of this. And particularly here, what it does is reduce the size of our stormwater drainage requirements. That's, for me, the big winner. Just put as much in as you can. Talk to the local government, make sure they're happy. But the reduced cost of and we'll get to this. This is what I'm so excited about for this conference, is this understanding that trees are not the big meanie and killing infrastructure. So if we learn that today, I'll be stoked. We have research that demonstrates that people do appreciate infrastructure in their houses. The cost of Bannister Creek, so it's a restoration, increased in value by 17 to 26,000, and that was 10 years ago, so they're right up there now. But this is I love this. So 5,000 homes sold in Perth, large verge trees increase their property value by $14,000. So yes, go the large verge tree. But this is the bit that made me really sad. Decreases if you had a tree in your back garden. But anyway, let's not go there. So their skills and knowledge is definitely available, where there's so many guidelines that will help people design. So designing for a cool city, designing for the way we can incorporate trees in our street system and our stormwater system. And this is Vic. I think this is Vic. This is you, yeah? Is this yours? Or is this not?
Yes.
Yeah. So you'll hear about this. This is the value of getting trees connected with your stormwater, getting the water in. Look how much bigger they are, much healthier, happier. We have design guidance about it. Look at all these different ways of getting the water into a tree, depending on where you are, depending on your conditions. There is some guidance that will help with this. This is going to help you design a biofilter on an individual lot. We have these. It's been fully researched in terms of the performance, the sizing, getting through all the approvals even. We have very strong policy support, so State Planning Policy 7, which is all about design. All of those critical... I keep losing my button. No, it's not working. I think I killed it. All of those design factors, trees, green infrastructure has a big impact and can deliver. Sorry, Rob. But the other big thing down there is the evidence now from the West Australian Planning Commission that poor design is bad. $29,000 per dwelling is the cost to the community of poor medium density development. So let's use some of these figures. We have the policy. So we know trees need water to grow with this poor little bugger, but how clever is a tree? Don't you love it? Climate change. We will see a 10% decrease in our groundwater allocations by 2030 with more to come. Evapotranspiration, I said, will increase. We need more water for plants. Where can we plant them? Let's plant them where we have shallow groundwater, because that can help manage that. Okay, how do we do it better? Let's think about deciduous versus evergreen. They actually need their water at different times. So when is our water falling? What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to get the water into the ground? Maybe a deciduous tree is good. Or are we trying to manage our stormwater and our shallow groundwater? Then let's go for an evergreen. So let's think about how smart we are with the different types of trees that we're going to use. Because a tree, you will find the right tree for your site and for your conditions no matter what. So we've spoken about canopy liability. We do know that sometimes people cut trees if they hang over their property, but Anyway, you've got to think about. But then if we don't have shade, the cost to the community of not having shade is huge. We do probably have a few research gaps. We're not exactly sure where all the trees are getting their water from. Is it the shallow system? And hopefully these guys, smart guys, are going to tell us today. We know that we need to have everybody in the room all on the same conversation. So then you can't point fingers at everybody and say, it's the drainage engineer who told me I had to do this. No, let's work together. And I have to thank Paul for our arborist. Isn't he awesome, hey? So, sadly there's only 2 chicks in that, but, we'll get there. Urban designer, engineers, environmental scientists, landscape architect, asset manager, critical part of the conversation, and get the community involved. You can all do it. Because what would be awesome is a minimum standard for green infrastructure. A lot of local governments now have a local policy that says every new development requires 1 street tree. That's a start, that's great. But let's do it across the board. And then everybody levels the playing field, and then we can just increase. Trees on local government asset registers are really, really important. As soon as your local government sees a tree as an asset, it has a value, it is worth looking after. And I guess the thing about getting water into our streets is your asset management register and policy is probably your most powerful tool. Your long-term financial plan as a local government, those are the most critical things. Let's get some of this stuff in that now, because we know the time to get the results out of a tree is not a short one, it's a long one. We want, a lot of you have got local planning policies to say people can't take out trees, which is awesome, but we really need improved budgets for maintenance. I know that there's this perception that it's okay to build a road but not okay to pay for somebody to clean it up. I don't still understand that difference between civils versus services. So let's lobby and try and change the way we fund things, because good money should be paying for somebody to do something. So I'm not quite sure about that. The economists will tell me that I'm wrong. Integrated delivery. Let's think about how we're getting all of these things, because the more outcomes we can tick, the better the thing is that we're trying to achieve. We can, by using green infrastructure in an integrated way, address urban heat. We can reduce the size of our drainage systems and the land that they take up. We can deliver biodiversity and even urban food. That's such a cool idea these days. And improve the community health. We have the documented evidence that shows it. And I'm sure you've all seen this, but God, wouldn't that be fabulous? Thank you.